We have 4 presenters today. The work that you're going to be hearing about is based upon the study of the impact of CARLA Summer Institute course on styles and strategies-based instruction that our lead presenter, Andrew Cohen, used to teach when he was at the University of Minnesota. He's now a professor emeritus, coming to you from California, and he's joined by his 3 undergraduate research assistants, Leif Anderson, Namitha Binu, and Sai Talapegada. So I want to welcome all 4 of our presenters, and I'm just going to go ahead and hand things over to you, Andrew.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Leif. Great, introduction. So the CARLA Summer Institute course on styles and strategies-based instruction. These days it's being called strategy instruction, but the styles is an important part of what we're going to talk about. It was offered for 22 years from 1996 to 2017. During that time, 553 teachers, researchers, and administrators participated in the course from all different programs, including the FBI, the CIA, Defense Foreign Language, and so forth. The manual of the course was a revised version, 2006, of a manual, a guide that Susan Weaver and I put together called Styles and Strategies-Based Instruction, a teacher's guide. And Susan was really the first instructor of the course in 1996. And then we were just teaching language instructors at the U at that point. It was just becoming a summer institute. I learned about the termination of this first and longest running summer institute course that CARLA was offering when I was at a conference last October before this craziness of COVID in Osaka in October. At the meeting, there were 2 important keynote addresses for me. Even though I was jet lagged, I really liked hearing what Luke Plonsky from Northern Arizona had to say. He reported on a meta-analysis of strategy instruction, which showed encouraging results. That's when you take a bunch of different studies on strategy instruction, and he found it had there was a significant effect of doing actual explicit strategy instruction with learners. And then there was a keynote by Peter Gu, who's at Victoria University, New Zealand. He's originally from Beijing. He made a plea for further research in this area of strategizing. And it was interesting, while I was actually at that meeting, I sent an email to Martha Nykus in Indiana, in Bloomington, asking her, was the CARLA course terminated? And she said, yeah, 2 years ago, 2017 was the last time. So I found that out while the sessions were still going on. And thanks to input from Karen Larson, I learned that there was a research grant for retirees from the U, and so I applied and got it to do research to find out the impact of this course over all those years. And it stipulated that I recruit undergraduates, so I did. And so Leif Anderson and Namitha Binu and Sai Talapegada were hired as my assistants in this project. And we've also had 2 wonderful colleague consultants, Rebecca Oxford, Professor Emerita from the University of Maryland. It was and Martha Nykus from Indiana University. They were both instructors in the course. Rebecca for at least 8 of the early years, and Martha regularly for the remainder of the years. And I've been a guest speaker at the institutes I no longer taught directly. I would come, and different summers I would help out in Martha's courses. Okay, so what are the research questions then of our study? In what ways did participation in the Styles and Strategies-Based Instruction CARLA Summer Institute course impact the participants' subsequent careers? And I purposely say careers, since some are both teacher, administrator, whatever. What might have been the role played by the recency of their participation in the course? The type of language program they were involved in, the students' proficiency levels, and the language being taught. So these are some of the research questions we were interested in.
Yeah, and so with our sample, out of the 242 participants from the course that Karen Larson and Carla were still in touch with, 29 volunteered to actually participate in our study, being 12% of those that we emailed. Out of these 29, 5 ultimately participated in the follow-up interview, out of 9 who initially agreed to actually participate. And with all of those who decided to participate in our study, they fell into 3 time periods, 1996 to 2007, 2007 to 2013, and 2014 to 2017. And with those who took the survey, levels of teaching were primarily elementary, middle school, high school, and college, and with college primarily being undergraduate professors. And so this is data from our survey demonstrating what the range of years that participants took the course. And as you can see, as time goes on, like the participants who took the course most recently were the ones who responded to this survey. And also, this represents the levels that participants of the survey taught. And as you can see, elementary, high school, and undergraduate teachers were most represented.
So a lot of our data showed that immersion and language teachers were the most prevalent in terms of responses, and there was a good mix between those two. A few of the immersion teachers were also language teachers. Of the languages taught, there were several, but the most common seemed to be Spanish, followed up by the immersion teachers who taught English. And as you can see by this graph, most of the teachers did teach a foreign language class, with the next significant amount of teachers being immersion teachers.
For our research, we first needed to create a survey, and we did that using Qualtrics, and we had about 30 items in there. Initially, the survey was piloted to about 5 former course participants before we sent it out to others as well. And we also got feedback from Professor Oxford and Nikos, and we used that feedback to change the survey up in a more favorable manner. And these are some survey sample questions that we put in the survey. Looking back, what do you remember using from the course? Please highlight several activities that influenced your role as a language instructor, a teacher, educator, and/or an administrator. The purpose of this question was to sort of jog back their memory, because some of them could have taken this course all the way back in the 2000s. And we have another question that we wanted to show. And this question is, if you have been a language instructor, to what extent do you think sharing your knowledge of Ssbi influenced your students' awareness of learning styles and their language strategy use? And the purpose of us putting this question in the survey is to sort of understand from their minds to the extent to which Ssbi principles were applied in their own classrooms. So after sending the survey out to,
So after sending the survey out, we did a follow-up interview. We were going to do a follow-up interview, and it was prepared for 9 respondents who initially agreed to participate. And there were both general questions, and then based on what the respondents answered in the survey, there were specific questions tailored to them. A sample question was, are you able to identify certain strategy areas that you supported your students with as a consequence of the Ssbi course? For example, in the areas of listening, speaking, reading, writing, grammar, vocabulary, or pragmatic strategies. This question was asked because we wanted to kind of figure out where specifically most of the Ssbi course material that was used by the teachers went to. So after that, we did data collection, and the CARLA office initially sent out an email to former course participants inviting them to respond to the survey. After an initial send out, we only had a few respondents. So to kind of give people more incentive, we said that we would give $25 gift cards out to participants, and that tripled the initial response level. These responses were all recorded in Qualtrics, and 5 follow-up interviews were conducted. 4 of them were recorded over video, and 1 was an audio recording by telephone. Those participants that conducted a follow-up interview were given an extra $25 gift card for completing this task.
And in analysis of our data, Qualtrics provided basic statistical analyses, particularly with participant demographics, which provided a description of the sample, and along with the time frame in which the course was taken and other variables associated with the participants. Content analysis of the open-ended interviews was performed, and that's what a lot of our data is drawn from today that we're reporting to you. And content analysis of the transcripts that we have from the interviews, both video and telephone, are ongoing.
So some of our findings were that the impact was a function of recency. So the level, or the impact as a function of recency, it did not matter if the class had been taken recently or several years prior. The level of impact really depended on how much each person took from the class. Most of the immersion teachers said that the Ssbi course greatly impacted how they taught, and 8 people took it before 2007, 10 people took it between 2007 and 2013, and 11 people took it from 2013 to 2017. Participants who took it recently, we did notice that they wrote more in their responses to us.
So after going through the course, many of the participants said they had a sort of change of perspective on teaching in a way. So one of the ways that we heard that they modified some of their teaching techniques is to put more emphasis on like focusing on a learner's style preferences and strategy choices in their classrooms. And a few of the participants actually designed surveys, and Professor Cohen actually assisted them in doing this, where they administered these surveys to their classes in order to figure out the distribution of the different / diverse learning style preferences that their students in their classes held. And another important point that they emphasized was in their response to us in the survey is that some of them really put emphasis on making sure that the students in their classes knew why they were teaching a certain strategy, or what is the importance of teaching the content in a manner of an activity that they were implementing in their class. So all of them agreed upon, or most of them agreed that students in a given class should have the freedom to choose their own sort of learning style or preferences through doing, activities, like different types of interactive activities. So some of these are example activities, for example, collaborative writing, paired work where they work in groups, role playing, skimming and scanning text, as well as improvisation, all of which might lead into improv, as well as a few other fun activities that they can do. But essentially, the point of this is to give students the freedom to choose to learn a certain amount of content in the manner that they want to learn it in. And what I found was from my interview, from the person who I interviewed, is that it actually increased the enthusiasm in the students, as well as like their eagerness to learn also has increased.
Andrew?
Andrew, I think you're on mute.
Andrew, you're muted.
So one of the things that came to the fore was that it was important to assess learner style preferences when dealing with the curriculum for the classroom. But I want to lay out here, why don't you lay out all three categories? Yeah, so style preferences in the literature mostly have focused on visual, auditory, and hands-on kinesthetic type approaches, but that's only a part of style preferencing. The other two areas are equally important: cognitive style preferences, which are like concrete, sequential, random, intuitive, and they're more or less in opposition. A teacher may be more concrete, sequential. Today we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 activities. And the students, some of the students may be random intuitive, so they're not processing the 1, 2, 3, 4. They could care less what order things are being presented in. Some learners are more global and others more detail oriented, and so forth. And then there are the personality related style preferences, such as being more extrovert or introvert, and also being more reflective or impulsive, things like that. So it's quite an array. We handle it. It's brought up in the manual, and I think teachers really enjoyed getting into this.
And so as the Ssbi course was very interactive in nature, from the responses to the survey, I found that active involvement created very valuable experiences for participants and their peers in the course. And it was reported that, like, through observations and discussions, participants in the course actually brought back a lot of what they learned from Professor Cohen and other instructors of the course, as well as knowledge that they learned from their peers that were actually participating in the course as well. And they also developed an analytical framework for teaching activities that they brought back to their home institutions. Additionally, survey participants brought back ideas for classroom activities, which developed due to the interactive nature of the course. As Sai mentioned, paired sharing, role playing, and collaborative writing, to name a few. And participants also became more aware of their own learning styles, recognizing that sensory distractions can disrupt student learning. And one of the reports from a respondent to the survey mentioned how there was a listening activity where all the participants of the course were supposed to participate, and he had shut his eyes in order to kind of block out other stimuli. And that really helped him learn the material better because it was auditory, and he applied that to his future teaching activities. And continuing with the interactive nature of the course, participants also reported incorporating more learning games to promote an interactive learning environment in their teaching after the course, which seemed to be pretty universal, as well as how the course accentuated the relationship between learning styles on the one hand and language learning and use strategies on the other. And Andrew, if you want to comment on that last point, feel free.
Yeah. Notice that I talk about language learning and use strategies, because I would make the point that language learning strategies can work very effectively to help students get an A in German or French or Spanish or any language they're taking, Swahili. But that doesn't mean they have effective strategies for using the language, for actually performing. So put in a speaking or listening or reading or writing situation, they may not be good at the performance. which belies this grade of A they got on the course, because they're good at taking tests and they're good at learning the material, and perhaps they then forget it right afterwards. So that's a distinction in there. And the learning styles one I already mentioned, but yes, the relationship between styles and strategies. It may be that the style you use has you, therefore, you being strategic in a certain way, because you are concrete sequential. So your strategies are going to be consistent, and you're going to be tracking whether the teacher is on point 1, 2, or 3, and you're going to be learning grammar rules that way and so forth. This was going to vary from student to student. I wanted to say it before when Namitha was presenting about freedom in choosing what you do. Sometimes you find that a class activity puts you right up against a style preference you have. It's a listening activity, but you're visual and you're terrible at listening. So we talk, and I learned a lot of this from Rebecca Oxford as we co-taught the course over the years. You need to do style stretching. you need to go beyond your comfort zone. And so I think some of this came out in this research we've done. Some of the responses that respondents had was they're getting in touch with how tricky it is, how complex it is, but how rewarding it can be for students.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So from the survey, we have a few takeaways for teaching as well as learning. So a few takeaways that we have for teaching are all students have their own learning style preferences and repertoire of language learning and use strategies. And this is important when it comes to teaching that we should keep in mind. It's also important that even though traditionally speaking, there is like throughout education, there's like a lecture sort of format in terms of like just teaching the content. It's also important that before engaging in extensive lecturing, that it's also important to have other activities that are more interactive for the students as well. And this is and the next takeaway that we have is mainly applied for like language classes, but once a student starts becoming more proficient in their target language, it's also important to introduce different teaching methods so that they can meet the level so that they can meet the current level of the students in the class. And this takeaway is more current. So some of the respondents to the survey actually stated that, oh, I might not have been using Ssbi principles that much, but I've been using it lately since like the last few months and over the summer due to the pandemic at hand, because they felt that the Ssbi approach lends itself nicely to online teaching, and we're in the age of online teaching due to the pandemic outside. And we have a few takeaways for learning as well. So one of the main takeaways, which Leif as well as Professor Cohen have reiterated, was it's important that learners understand their own learning style preferences when engaging in a class sort of thing. And it's also important that learners have the freedom of choosing their learning style preferences in like a given class. And even though like not all schools or classes or teachers have the time nor the resources, it's important to at least incorporate some of these aspects into the class. And that's what many of the survey respondents emphasize, as well as that's what we also got out of it.
So one thing we did notice in terms of the diffusion of knowledge was that it had a trickle-down structure. So a lot of the participants were administrators, and they were able to use the knowledge that they gained from the course to bring it back to their language departments and teach other people, so that those teachers could also use that knowledge and give it to their students. Respondents who were also instructors at a university level passed on the knowledge from the course to other professors, grad students, and language instructors. And then Teachers who taught at multiple levels seemed to have more of an impact because they were reaching more students. So it wasn't just elementary or just junior high. It was a lot of different students from a lot of different points in their life.
And a summary of the information that we've shared so far, the course appears to have had a lasting impact on most of the survey respondents. And impact really depended more on how much the participants engaged with the course rather than its recency. Even though participants who took the course more recently were able to report on more of the activities that they incorporated into their teaching. And for teachers who participated in the course, the emphasis on interactive learning environments, the provision of terminology to describe instructional goals, and learner style preferences was particularly impactful to their teaching careers and has seemed to impact teachers who took it between 2000 and 2007, as well as more recently 2014 and 2017. Respondents also reported that they incorporated cultural context, improvisation, and the administration of the surveys introduced by the course into their teaching. And participants who identified themselves as administrators, as Namitha mentioned previously, brought knowledge from the course back to their home institutions and reported being able to instruct teachers on how to implement course activities and insights, which is particularly valuable because then the course was able to affect more than just the participants that were within the course itself. And so, like all studies, we had some limitations. Due to the 30 items that we had on our survey, with study attrition, the survey was 30 items. Some participants completed 5 of the items and then didn't complete the rest of the survey. And then there were the 242 participants that we sent it out to, but we only had 29 responding. As we all know, COVID-19 is affecting all of our lives right now. And with the onset of COVID, we were administering the survey in July and August when many teachers were preparing for the fall and online learning. So the survey could have not been really a high priority. And as the course was offered for 22 years, some of the survey participants reported that it was more difficult to remember specifically what aspects they had taken from the Ssbi course versus from other courses. So that was a difficult distinction that some participants had. And as the course was taught by different instructors, starting with Susan Weaver and Professor Cohen, and then going to Professor Cohen and Professor Oxford, and then Professor Nikas and Professor Cohen would often visit Professor Nikas's sessions of the Ssbi course. So there could have been some variation in the specific topics that were taught, but there was some continuity with Professor Cohen over time. So that could have been a small limitation. And as I mentioned, there was overlap with some of the instructors. And additionally, with some of the survey respondents, they reported that, okay, what is the usefulness of the survey, as there was an evaluation that occurred right after the completion of the course. And some reported, okay, I mentioned this in my evaluation, but I will report it here. But overall, we found that there was lots of very useful information that wouldn't have been included in the evaluation. And then, as I mentioned, compared to the course evaluation, it's looking at the impact over time and not just specific aspects of the course. And then with non-response bias, certain individuals, just like the review of a product, it could have been people who were great, who were positively impacted by the course, could have reported how, oh yes, I've incorporated all these different aspects into my teaching, whereas we had very few respondents reporting that there's little impact on their teaching, and then those who may have other opinions may not have actually completed the survey.
Yeah, and let me follow up on that before I say some takeaway here. There really is a difference between a course evaluation, which has lots of details. Carla does a wonderful job of asking a lot of questions about a lot of aspects of the course. It's different from what we did. We were really after what endures, because if you think about it, a lot of times you put a lot in your evaluation about the nature of the snacks and the breaks and the colleagues and this and that, but a lot of it that you then forget. Whereas we were after the long-term impact, the things that remain, the elements that actually are going to be seen over time. So there was a difference here. I should say, yes, it is kind of a limitation that we had different instructors. On the other hand, fabulous instructors. Those of you who know Rebecca Oxford know she's incredibly charismatic, as is Martha Nykus. Wonderful people, wonderful dynamics, and they got very high ratings for their courses. That's part of why the course continued through 2017, because the evaluations were extremely good. And I should also point out, people participated from all over the world at times when, unlike with COVID, we weren't Zooming. People were getting on planes and flying to Minnesota from Asia, from Europe, from all over the world. So that's also been a very exciting aspect of the course, its lasting power. Okay, so interpretations. The recency of the course may not have been a major factor. This was a surprise to me. I kind of expected that those who took the course, not only, who took it longer ago, would not only perhaps write less about it, but would have less to say. But we got some very good shares from people who took it a long time ago because the material was impactful to them and to their careers. And it was also a pleasure to see how often people would say, gee, yeah, that was in that course, but I've been able to apply it to this and this and this other situation. I went through the data and I would mark with a highlighter those instances which I saw where it looked like there was carryover, and there were a lot of them. And my research assistants also noted that. So that was actually a very special piece in the course, that it wasn't somehow just reserved for language instruction, but it had to carry over to other areas.
And as hopefully many of you are interested in, these are activities and insights that can be applied to future courses from the responses that we gathered in our survey. So as Andrew mentioned, there was the applicability to teaching other than language, and there was also the applicability of the Ssbi course to different levels of learning, ranging from elementary to college level, university level. There was the value that survey respondents placed on the learning styles survey, as well as the language strategy use inventory. And many respondents would use either the survey or the inventory, use that at the onset of their course and measure how their students' learning preferences changed or their language strategy use changed over that course. The Ssbi course also emphasized a really purpose-driven approach, having teachers and participants of the course really focus and describe to their students why they were doing certain things, and really remaining focused on the goals of teaching activities. And the Ssbi course also helped teachers to emphasize motivation through interactive learning and through creating really interactive learning environments. As I mentioned previously, through learning games and other collaborative activities, as everyone has reiterated. And especially with one of my interview respondents, there's a big emphasis on the meta language for explaining teaching activities to learners, which can really help emphasize teaching goals and how things are being used to achieve learning goals in a course. And really helping learners know what will come next, as a lot of learners are like, okay, what's going to happen next in the course? And a big thing that we've been repeating is understanding learner differences. And that's a really big takeaway that creators of future courses can take from the Ssbi course, as personal learning styles are manifested in teaching. And that was something that survey respondents reported again and again, and how the course was focused on learners' styles and strategies, but teachers also learned about their personal learning styles and how that manifested in their teaching. And also, as we have mentioned, improvisation. Teaching involves improvisation and doesn't just have to be a very concrete teaching outline for every course. So the Ssbi course really emphasized improvisation and being able to adjust teaching during a lecture. And then, as there were all the wonderful instructors, as Professor Cohen mentioned, a lot of the survey respondents reported learning course management skills through observing all the instructors of the Ssbi course. So that is something that future instructors should also focus on, is demonstrating the things that they are teaching to their students, which they can learn through observation. And this is the second slide. The use of the course manual was also very helpful, as Professor Cohen mentioned at the outset of this presentation. So the course manual could be incorporated into future courses. And there was this specific section on individual attitudes and personalities that some survey respondents reported as being very useful to understanding learner differences. Creating interactive learning and work groups and introducing real-world applications throughout the course was also a very valuable experience for Ssbi course participants. And for those participants of the survey who reported that there was less impact than the others, they reported that they were very familiar with the research that was being presented at the Ssbi course. So perhaps really keeping up on relevant and emerging research could be very impactful for future courses. And that is not to say that the Ssbi course didn't remain relevant. It's just to say that incorporating relevant and emerging research and staying up on that would be good for future courses. And finally, lesson plans and final projects that occurred in the Ssbi course really translated to home institutions that course participants were teaching at. And a lot of the survey participants reported using the lesson plans that they created and the final projects to actually teach to their students. So that was fair. Those are all insights, and I'd be happy to take any questions on those after the conclusion of the presentation.
So, pedagogical implications. There are genuine benefits from having learners take a style preference survey at the start of a language course. Students can also benefit from taking a language learner strategy inventory at the outset of a course in order to get in touch with the language strategies that are likely to, they are likely to use both for learning and performance tasks. I should point out that we didn't just grab a style preference survey off the streets or a language strategy inventory. The style preference inventory that I constructed with the input from Rebecca Oxford and a graduate student of mine was based on other work people had done in the field And we combined in an effort and put together this style preference survey, which is still being used in the field. I'm still getting requests worldwide for its use. And the strategy inventory had as its starting point a fine inventory that Rebecca Oxford had developed, the SIL, the Strategy Inventory for Language Learning. But this one, the one we used for this course, just focused on the skill areas of reading, writing, listening, speaking, and so forth, rather than on issues like metacognitive, cognitive, social, and affective strategies, which were in the SIL, and we didn't go there. Okay. It would seem that the positive results from the impact would suggest that CARLA should reinstate this course in its summer offerings. Whether or not that happens, I don't know, but that could be a recommendation out of this, our findings, especially since courses are online. It would seem to me it's one, the value of which, particularly given the fact that we've just now had in last October, our third conference on situating strategy use worldwide. So it comes at a time when there is a real interest in strategy instruction.
So we have some suggestions for future research. It would be beneficial to do the study again, or a similar study with more participants, because a larger sample size is always good for a research project. It would also be beneficial to collect data from learners in the courses taught by the participants, since the study currently is mainly being conducted from the viewpoint of an instructor. This study should also be providing encouragement to other teachers and other researchers who might wish to track the long-term impact of their own courses that they're teaching too. So for a few conclusions, we would we would like to recommend that in order to assess like the long-term impact as well as the short-term impact, we think that it's important that impact, like the Summer Institute courses and other courses, could assess their impact in a differential manner. So number one, they could give like an evaluation right after the course, which is what many courses do. Then they can follow up within a year of completing the course by, like, let's just say in the first evaluation, if we have people volunteer saying, oh, we're free to respond in like a year, we can contact those people within a year of completing the course and do kind of like a delayed evaluation. And after that, if we want to, we could also perform a more long-term impact study, kind of like the study that we just did right now.
And something that we have reiterated throughout the whole presentation is that even though the focus of the Ssbi course was on language learners themselves, participants learned about their own learning styles and strategies and how their own behaviors influence their teaching, which is a very valuable conclusion that we came to and was very encouraging from our results.
And finally, we saw that this study was a good example of reflexive research, in that we sort of went with the flow. We had a lot of challenges, and I didn't from the outset, because I really didn't know how we were going to do this. I didn't have any good handle on how we were going to look retrospectively over so many years. We worked together on this. Every item on the questionnaires, every item in the interview, the four of us worked through. We've been meeting regularly about once a week. When you say mostly once a week.
Yeah, once a week since March.
Once a week since March. And this is where we've gotten. And the experience has been a very positive one of seeing that if we go with the flow, we added those gift cards when we didn't get a respondent, get respondents to tell us what we wanted. We've learned from the interview follow-ups, we've gotten extra details. So it's been quite a learning experience. And as far as we're concerned, it's an exciting one. We think it has real impact. And its import is well beyond Ssbi to all sorts of summer institutes. And we would venture to guess that whereas in medicine, they do a lot of long-term studies like this, in our field of language studies, it's less common. So we think it's also innovative work. We intend to write up a report and also to do some articles. At this point, I'd like to stop though and have Kate lead us in questions. Oh yeah, and then the references. There's the manual that I kept referring to. By the way, it was reissued in China with a forward in Chinese. And then those are the two keynote addresses that were presented just some months ago in Osaka, Japan, that really encouraged me to do this study. So with that, let's turn it over to Kate and to questions.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, Leif, Namitha, and Sai. So the first question is from Masako, and it's about connecting Ssbi to differentiated instruction. And they're seeing a connection between Ssbi and differentiated instruction. And the question is, how would you use Ssbi in younger learners' classes at the elementary level to find their learning styles and preferences? Do you have any concrete examples to use for young learners in grades 1 through 3 to find their learning preferences and strategies?
It's a really good question. My work with bilingual education, I was an evaluator for one of the first Title VII bilingual programs in Redwood City, California. And I found that learners by first grade, definitely by second grade, were able to do a meta, were able to step back from the language and talk about their learning act. So yes, it is possible to have young kids talking about their style preferences. And Rebecca Oxford and I developed and constructed a young person's style inventory, as well as a young person's strategy inventory, but a style survey and a strategy inventory. We have them for young people. We've even translated them into Spanish. We have Spanish versions because we had quite a request from immersion programs initially to do this sort of thing. So yes, this work has already been done, and I'd be delighted you could contact me by email and I could pass on to you some of this information. By the way, I personally have worked and have developed a manual for working with one charter school north of Minneapolis, 5th and 6th graders, in being more aware of their styles and strategies, doing the interviews, doing the inventories, the surveys, and I've visited several times. So I've done hands-on with one, it's a Spanish-Chinese charter school in Lake Forest, north of Minneapolis.
So while we're waiting for other questions to come in, I have a question about the data. I know you talked about the evaluations from the years when the Summer Institute was actually offered, but I wondered if you did any kind of a comparison between the feedback that was provided in the evaluations that are administered immediately after the Summer Institute with the data that you collected through the survey that you just conducted.
What would you guys say? We got some. Did we actually get access to some of those evaluations? Karen offered them. Did we actually look at them and compare?
So that is
I don't
something.
recall that we did.
That is something that we're hoping to do with our write-ups. That we haven't directly compared the evaluations to the results of our surveys yet. But that is the kind of their next step in our research.
Part of the problem was, if I'm not mistaken, do we have the names of the people in those evaluations, or were they anonymous? What we'd love to do is to match up actual course evaluations with our respondents. We know who the respondents were because they needed to give us their information if they were willing in order to get paid. But in terms of the course evaluations, I think they were anonymous.
They are anonymous.
Yeah,
so it would be more sort of general findings. Yeah.
We'd have to do a general thing, and we definitely could do that. as I said, your course evaluations are going to be rich in a lot of immediate information that is not the same kind of thing as what we did over time. But that's a nice suggestion. We can certainly do that to get kind of a ballpark feeling of what it is that comes out of an evaluation and how that's similar and different from the more long-term approach which we took in this current reflexive study.
Mm-hmm. So Martha Nikos has her hand raised. Martha, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Okay, I will unmute and maybe even try to appear.
Hi.
I want to say thank you very, very much for your wonderfully concerted efforts in putting together this study. It is really a very timely one, and I particularly commend you, Andrew, for inviting the young folks to help along with this, because I think that's the way we grow our next generation of researchers. So I would like to commend Sai, Namita, and Leif for doing this. I know they were very, very engaged. Speaking of engagement, one of the things that I really found was important to underscore was the experiential part of the course. As you know, pretty much every day, it was an all day, every day teaching experience. And I think we had at least one activity, no, actually 2 activities per hour constantly going on. And as the teachers got involved in the actual activities, the major factor afterwards was to do what I used to call the metacognitive moment, where they used to reflect on what aspects of the activity, which was a language activity usually, would really enhance what they were learning and what they got out of it, what their learning style preferred and didn't prefer during the activity, and so on. So it was very fine-grained and constant. And so that consistency helped make it really more, and really, I guess, endure. And that's what I really love about this study, is the enduring portions and how you emphasize that and really probed for it as well. I really also very much appreciate the examples that you brought up during either the interviews or from the surveys. That one person who talked about shutting their eyes, that is a type of style preference, but also to get that extra view that it allowed him to block out other stimuli. That's something that I personally never really thought about. And so this is a really helpful piece right here. Also, I recognized a lot of the positive washback from the use of terminology that you mentioned, how the teachers and also some administrators talk about how they were able to co-opt the language of the area and utilize it in their teaching. I talk a lot also about this idea of after every act, well, not maybe when you're teaching, not every single activity, but some type of reflection about what did we just do? What made it helpful for you as a learner? What were some of the drawbacks? That helps in terms of also stretching one's style. I would always make the point that yes, you have a learning style, but if you need to stretch it because sometimes it's uncomfortable to learn in a particular way, the way to stretch it is to implement different strategies. So that's your stretch factor, if you will. So I'll posit that as a possible research avenue if anyone would like to pick up on that. And so there's this question also that you brought up, which I found fascinating, about impact and also recency. The recency factor apparently helped everyone really become more fine-grained in the types of things that they were talking about, and they were able to probably give you more examples, but the impact was something that they themselves had experienced. And that, you know, by doing the types of things you're talking about as a teacher really makes all the difference in the world. But then also having what I call the metacognitive moment. I talk about that, by the way, in a chapter that was in the Chameau and V. Harris book. I can send that out to folks if you'd like. It talks actually specifically about this course and what some of the things that I've done in the course over the years. I think I started in 2003 and was, continuously there through 2017. Yes, indeed, research does get a little bit dated. And I think that was one of the things that some of the folks were starting to pick up on. And I could have done much more to update certain things. However, the actual types of things that we were doing in the course were very relevant. I think many people, and I won't say any more after this, many people really value the experiential side, and then they're able to sort out for their particular area and teaching situation what will be most valuable to apply. So thank you very much, everyone, for your wonderful concerted efforts on this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you for all your wonderful instruction over the years. Susan Weaver and I put those tasks in there from the very beginning, just for that reason, to make sure people weren't just getting cognitive hearing about this, but that they were actually involved in hands-on. It became experiential.
So we've got a question in the chat. I think we have time for one more question. And this is from Jorge, who asks, and I'm just going to read it as written because I don't want to misinterpret the question. Do you have any comments relating strategies for language and culture learning using and concepts such as growth mindset and recent developments in neuroplasticity related to language learning?
No.
That's a tough one.
Not really. I haven't followed, I followed neuro-linguistic approaches, but not the latest on neuroplasticity. But I gotta say, I'm working on my 13th language, Chinese, and at the present time. And I would say that it really expands the mind. I don't think it's accidental that that charter school north of Minneapolis has the Spanish immersion kids having to do Chinese immersion as well, and vice versa, a bit, each week. I think it's great to expand the mind. And as Martha so rightly said, you have on the one hand, style preferences, and on the other, strategies, and sometimes they don't fit so neatly. And one of the tensions involved in talking about the two is having participants of courses be aware of that they're different and that they can work in sync. And I think, as Martha nicely said, you may come up against some stretching needs where, oh my God, I'm not a visual person. I don't want to have to look at all these, designs or whatever in learning, but they do. And then they find strategies to make it, to cope with it.
Well, so we're at the 1 o'clock hour and we want to be respectful of people's time. So I just want to take a moment to thank all 4 of our presenters. And I particularly want to thank Leif, Ssai, and Namitha for doing this presentation to a national audience. At one point, there were 40 people in the Zoom room. So I just really want to commend you for doing this. It can be really intimidating as an undergraduate to do this kind of presentation, and you all did such a great job. And thank you to Andrew for bringing this project to CARLA and for sharing the research with everybody. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.